This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. I'm back at you this week with another great story, and it's a crazy one. The title of it is Stoic Husband Keeps Cheating Wife Around Just Long Enough to File for Divorce. Now, let's get into this story. And this woman starts out and she says, I cheated on my husband, and now I'm racked with guilt and cannot function. This mistake happened 2 days ago, and I immediately regretted it. It was the worst decision of my life, and I still can't believe what I did. Let me first explain our situation. I'm 37 years old, and my husband is 38. We've been married for 15 years and have two children, a daughter 14 and a son 12. My husband is the primary bread earner, but I too work full time and contribute my share to our expenses and investments. While my husband doesn't require me to, I insist on it as we are partners in life. That's why I feel so terrible about what I did. It's eating away at me, and I don't think I'll make it through another day without losing my mind. I'm not going to be too specific here, but I will disclose that I work at a facility that helps recovering addicts re-enter society. We see people from all walks of life, from homeless people living on the street to people with great wealth. My coworkers and I often say that addiction is the great equalizer, and your status in society doesn't matter. It can impact anyone. It was at work where I met the guy I got involved with. I will not call what I did an affair because there was no love or feelings between us. It was just something I did without thought, almost like being under hypnosis. The guy was a former patient who was last treated at our facility over 3 months ago. He's 28 years old and has wealthy parents who support his lifestyle. So this guy's like 9 years younger than her. He works weekends as a bouncer and several days a week as a driver, but his parents provide the bulk of his income. He has a bold personality and is very, very persuasive. Being a bouncer, he's physically fit and somewhat handsome in a rough sort of way. I think all these factors combined with his age were what drew me to him and caused me to do something I normally would never do. I want to make it clear to anyone reading this that I am not a counselor or therapist and have no involvement with the treatment of patients. I'm employed by the facility in an administrative capacity, and therefore there was no violation of ethical conduct here. As I mentioned, this guy has a bold personality and immediately started flirting with me the minute he set foot in our office. Now, I've had other patients flirt with me in the past, but it's never been more than innocent banter from older men. This time it was different. I could sense he meant what he was saying, and he was relentless in his pursuit of me. I found his behavior both unsettling and flattering at the same time. After he completed treatment, I hadn't seen or heard from him until last week. That's when we ran into each other at the gas station. He was riding his motorcycle and looked so much healthier and clean cut than before. He was very mannerly and apologized to me for being so overbearing before. Seeing this other side of him really touched me, making me feel comfortable talking to him. We chatted a bit before parting ways, and he asked for my number. Now, what could he want your number for? He said it was so we could keep in touch. I reluctantly gave it to him, but listen to this, guys, but knew I shouldn't have. He reassured me by saying he enjoyed talking to me, but I knew he wanted more. She says, I'll admit I too was curious, but justified it as being just an innocent friendship. I'm not going to go through everything that led up to it, but earlier this week we met at his apartment and had S. I instantly regretted it. So she just runs into this guy last week, and already a week later, she's already in the sack with him. Unbelievable. And this is a married woman with 2 kids. That day, I had a dental appointment at 2:30 and decided to take the rest of the afternoon off since my dentist is near my home and I didn't want to drive 25 minutes back to the office and then turn right around and drive 25 minutes back. After going to the dentist, I met him at his place as he had been wanting me to see his new apartment and furniture. Oh, that's what he wanted to show you? Sure. When I got there, things escalated quickly. I knew it was wrong, but I forged ahead and did it anyway. I was totally immersed and hypnotized by the buildup, but the act itself was sobering, and I was full of regret as soon as we finished. Well, why weren't you full of regret when you started? Why weren't you full of regret during? No, you didn't become full of regret until you finished. I quickly got out of there and told him I never intended for this to happen and I couldn't see him again. He asked me, "What about our friendship?" I told him we never had a friendship. We don't have anything. On my way home, I stopped by the city park to use the restroom and clean up. They have flush toilets and running water, and I stayed there for over 30 minutes trying to wash away the guilt and shame. While doing so, I started thinking about what I had done and the possible repercussions. Well, you should have thought of those things before you did it. I could have gotten pregnant, or even worse, acquired an STD, an incurable STD. I then started to panic. After leaving the park, I went straight to the pharmacy and bought the non-prescription Plan B kit. The young pharmacist there was very helpful and discreetly told me what I needed. I wish I could thank her publicly, but obviously I can't. I took the pill while sitting in the parking lot and then called the guy to ask him about whether he was disease-free and about his relationship history. Well, those are questions you should have asked him right up front, and in the first place, you shouldn't have been with this guy. Before answering my questions, he apologized to me and then said he didn't presently have any STDs. I asked if he had been tested recently. He said the last time he remembered being tested was over 5 years ago. I asked if he had other partners since then besides me, and he said yes. I asked how many, and he said he didn't know the actual number, but said it was more than 5. Hearing this shocked me, and I started crying. He then told me he believes he always wore protection with all his previous partners, but wasn't completely sure because he was using back then. I asked why he didn't use protection with me, and he said because I didn't ask him to. After hearing him say that, I hung up on him and blocked his number. I then sat in my car and cried. See what I said about these women when they cheat? They never require their partners to wear protection, regardless of what they say. It's very rare. When I got home, I changed my clothes and put them in the washer and prepared dinner for my family. They weren't due home until 7 since my daughter had a game and my husband and son were going to watch her. When they got home, we enjoyed a nice dinner, but I could hardly keep it together. Every time I made eye contact with one of them, I felt extreme guilt and almost started to cry. Last night went about the same, except I was even more emotional. My son noticed and asked if I was crying. I told him no, my eyes were watering due to the pollen in the air. I barely made it through the past 2 nights, but I don't think I'll make it through another night without breaking down. My initial thought was to just forget this whole thing ever happened and keep living my life as normal. Now I realize I can't do that and still maintain my sanity. On the flip side, if I tell my husband our perfect relationship will never be the same and my kids will lose all respect for me, please let me know what you would do in my situation. If you've ever had an experience like mine, I'd really like to hear how you handled it and how it turned out. And that's the end of her original post. And now we're going to take a look at a few responses she got from the community. But before we do that, I want to remind you, if you've liked what you've heard so far, make sure you hit that like button right now. That will help get this video seen by people all over the planet. Now, let's take a look at those responses. The first one's from a woman. She says, OMG, you've created a real mess for yourself. First, get tested for STDs if you haven't already done so. Next, sit down with your husband and tell him he deserves to know and be given the opportunity to leave you if he chooses to do so. I'm afraid what you have done has not only destroyed your marriage, but potentially put your own health and the health and safety of your family at risk. A recovering addict? Are you serious? And this woman makes a good point. Not only did she potentially put her husband's health at risk, but potentially also her children's health. And what about if this guy is some kind of psycho and he comes and tries to track her down or track her family down? She wasn't thinking about that. Next, here's a response from a guy. He says, I can see you are remorseful, but it still doesn't erase what you did. My wife of 7 years cheated on me with a guy she met at the grocery store. Their emotional affair lasted for a week, and they were physical just once. Are you sure about that? After which she confessed and cut contact. She tried everything to keep me, but I was done. I divorced her, moved out of state, and have since remarried. Your marriage is over, he says. The next response is from a woman. She says, I did something similar, but not with an addict. I quickly regretted my actions and cut off communications with the guy. My plan was to take it to the grave, but guilt was consuming me, and I confessed to my husband and then told my family. My husband tried his best, but he just couldn't get over the betrayal, and we divorced. That was 27 years ago, and I still miss him to this day. Now, I've done other stories like this where women who cheat and then years later they talk about all the regret they have and how they let that good guy get away and they didn't appreciate what they had when they had it. These responses are very typical. And the final response is from a guy. He says, you should confess to your husband tonight. And to make up for the betrayal, you should proactively offer him a hassle-free divorce. Let him keep all the assets and refuse any court-ordered alimony or child support. You are the one who caused this, and you are the only one who should suffer for it. Don't put your husband through the mental stress of staying married to a cheater, even if he wants to. So those are all the responses, and now she's got a bunch of updates we're going to go through. The first one happened 9 days later. She says, I confessed to my husband Friday evening while our kids were at the movies with their friends. It was very emotional for me and I couldn't stop crying. My husband's response, however, was not what I expected. While I know he was heartbroken and crushed by my actions, he stayed stoic throughout the whole thing and showed very little emotion. Right after I told him, he got up and walked over to the window and stood there for a while looking outside. I kept telling him I was sorry and asking him to tell me how he was feeling, but he didn't say anything. Well, how do you think he was feeling? When he finally turned to face me, the first thing he asked was if protection was used. I broke down crying and regrettably had to tell him we didn't. He just shook his head in disgust. I reassured him by telling him I had been tested but had not gotten the results back yet. Well, how is that reassuring? If you got tested and you don't have the results back yet, how is that going to reassure him about anything? He calmly told me that I would need to move into the spare room and would need to keep a distance for everyone's safety. I agreed and told him how sorry I was. He didn't respond to what I was saying. Instead, he told me we can tell the kids I tested positive for the virus and have to quarantine a few days. After he told me this, he turned and walked down the hall towards our master bedroom. I followed behind and asked him to tell me how he was feeling and to talk to me. He calmly but sternly told me he didn't want to talk and said he wanted to be alone with his thoughts. I asked him why, and he just looked at me, shook his head, and closed the door. I went back out to the living room and spent the next 2 hours crying on the sofa, thinking about what I could do to make things right. You can't do anything to make things right. I cleaned myself up before our kids arrived home around 10 o'clock. Upon their arrival, my husband came out of the bedroom to greet them, and the four of us chatted as they told us about the movie they saw and where they went to eat afterwards. My husband seemed in good spirits and asked my kids a bunch of questions about the movie. He then told my kids, "Your mom has something to tell you." I looked at him and he nodded. I told them that I had tested positive for the virus, but don't have any symptoms. I told them for everyone's safety, I'm going to sleep in the guest room for a few days and keep a distance from everyone. The kids seemed fine by this and asked how far they needed to stay away. My husband told them 6 feet. We then spent the rest of the night watching TV until after midnight when we retreated to our separate bedrooms. It was just like any other night and I was feeling better about things, but in the morning my sentiment quickly changed. At around 5 a.m. I heard my husband in the kitchen, so I got up to join him. He was sitting at the table drinking coffee, tapping his finger, and staring forward. When I entered the room, he didn't turn to acknowledge me. I said good morning and softly touched his neck, but he didn't say anything. I then went over and got a cup of coffee and joined him at the table. I asked him what he was thinking, and he just looked at me and then looked away. Well, what do you think he's thinking? She keeps asking him, what is he thinking? What does she think he's thinking after she just told him yesterday that she cheated on him? I asked if he was going to talk to me, and he said there was nothing to talk about. He said all he wanted to do now was to think. He told me that when we are around our children, we should both act like everything is normal. But when we're alone, he'd prefer I not say a word to him until he's ready to talk to me. I told him I understood and that I would be there for him when he's ready to talk. While I agreed to give him the space he needs, his silence and emotionless reaction is worrying me. Also, what could he be thinking about that we can't talk through together? I never expected him to react like this, and I'm really concerned. Has anyone else experienced this from your betrayed spouse? And that's the end of her first update. Then, 8 days later, she comes back with another update. She says, thanks to everyone who responded to my last update. Based on your responses, I've honored my husband's wishes and given him the space he requested to process things. I've not spoken a word to him unless he initiated the conversation or if I had a question about our kids. Things were going okay, and then yesterday it seemed like we made a huge breakthrough. It was my son's 13th birthday, and he wanted to go to an amusement park to celebrate. The four of us had a great time. My husband and I took turns pairing up with the kids and riding all the rides, including every roller coaster, some a couple times. By the end of the day, my husband and I were going on rides together and had a blast. It felt like it did when we first met. That evening, we all went out to my son's favorite restaurant and had a great dinner, and we surprised him with an ice cream cake. It was a fabulous day. I woke up this morning thinking we were headed in the right direction and was looking forward to building off the day we had yesterday. I went out to the kitchen and my husband was there and he actually greeted me with a good morning. I poured a cup of coffee for myself and refilled his cup and sat down next to him. We talked a bit about yesterday and how much fun we had. After a few minutes, he changed the conversation and said it was time for me to come clean and tell the kids and my parents what I had done. Hearing him say this nearly stopped my heart and I got a pit in my stomach. I asked him why and he said because they deserve to know the truth. I asked why can't we just keep this to ourselves and work through things? He told me because he's bearing all the weight of my actions and he doesn't want to do it anymore. I told him that wasn't true and let him know how terrible I felt and that I could hardly sleep or concentrate on anything since I did what I did. He told me he understood but said that he wanted me to tell them today and that if I didn't, he would be very disappointed and that he would be forced to tell them himself. This is very similar to another story I did a few weeks ago where the guy did the same thing. He made his wife confess to her kids and also to her parents and I think even to his parents. Very similar to what this guy is doing with his wife. I asked if he would join me for moral support and to show them we are unified. He said no, this was something I had to do on my own. This really hurt me as I thought for sure he'd want to be by my side to support me. I've spent the past few hours thinking about what I'm going to say to my kids and to my parents. I came up with several scripts, but they were not genuine. So I finally decided that I'm just going to come right out and tell them what I did, tell them it was wrong, that I'm very sorry, and ask for their forgiveness. There's nothing more I can do at this point. I've got to face the music for my actions. Also, since many of you have asked, I got the test results back and I'm all clear. That was a huge relief. However, the person at the clinic said I should repeat the test in 30 days just to make sure. He said since I took the test so soon after potentially being exposed, they recommend a follow-up test to confirm the initial results. This concerned me, but he told me he's never seen a positive result on a retest. I'll come back with an update after I speak to my family. I really appreciate those of you who've been praying for us. Please keep us in your thoughts and prayers. So that's the end of her second update. Then she comes back 4 days later with another update. She says, I've come back to let everyone know I did it. I made a complete confession to my kids and then to my parents. It was an extremely difficult process. My children had divergent responses. While both were shocked by what I told them, my daughter reacted with anger while my son reacted with deep concern. My daughter demanded I tell her who the guy was so that she can take revenge on him. I refused to give her his name and assured her I'd never see him again. Both children were very concerned for their father. They've circled the wagons around him and have made it clear to me they are on his side. My parents' reaction was one of extreme disappointment and shock. They too have rallied around my husband and have only spoken to me once by phone since I told them. Meanwhile, they've spoken to my husband at least a half dozen times since then. I'm glad they're all supporting him through this. He's a great man and deserves it. As for my husband, he thanked me for telling them and accepting all the blame. However, he's still treating me like he was before. I don't know where we go from here. For now, I'm just going to be the best wife and mother I can be. I really enjoy doing little things for my family, especially cooking and baking. Mealtimes seem to be our best time for family bonding, and I cherish them. Thanks to everyone who has been supporting me through this difficult process. And that's the end of her third update. Then she comes back 37 days later with a fourth update. She says, I want to first thank everyone who has been following my story and giving me support. Without your words of encouragement, I don't think I could have made it through the past month. As I reported in my last update, I had confessed to everyone in my family, and with that, I look forward to my husband and I taking the next steps towards healing our relationship. Instead, 2 Saturdays ago, my husband sat me down and told me he wants a divorce. He said he's tried moving past what I did, but he just can't. He said ever since I told him what I did, he has been under constant mental stress. He said the stress has now started to impact his physical health, explaining that earlier that week he went to the doctor and his blood pressure was dangerously high. It was so high he was put on medication. I was worried and full of regret for the pain and suffering I've caused him. I was also saddened that he didn't confide in me about this until then. I knew right there his trust for me was gone and our marriage was over. I cried and told him I will go along with whatever he wants as I don't want to cause him any more pain than I already have. He told me all he wanted was an amicable divorce where each of us is treated fairly and our kids are the top priority. I told him he has my commitment for that, but in the meantime, I'm going to keep trying to convince him to stay married. He just smiled and I went over and gave him a big hug. For the past few weeks now, we've been working out the details and breaking the news to our families. We told our kids and they handled it as well as could be expected. Initially, they both cried and lashed out at me for breaking up the family, but after my husband and I talked to them a while, they felt better about things. At the end of the conversation, we all hugged each other and carried on. It was very emotional for all of us. Our parents, however, have been another story. Both his parents and mine are very upset about this and want us to stay together. Our mothers have been trying to get my husband to change his mind. They are trying to convince him to go to therapy, but he will not entertain it. He's told them that he's done nothing wrong and doesn't need therapy. It's gotten so bad, I had to intervene and ask them to back off and let us work through this on our own. Isn't it amazing how in a lot of these stories, all the onus is put on the guy to go to therapy, go to IC, work through things, and then go to marriage counseling when the guy did nothing wrong? He's the injured party here, but all the pressure is put on him. That's where we are now. It's not the outcome I wanted, but perhaps it's the outcome I deserve. The interesting thing is, since we mutually agreed to divorce, we've had more in-depth and thoughtful discussions than we've had in a long time. Not only that, my husband is more open and relaxed now and has been initiating most of our conversations recently. I may be crazy saying this, but I think divorcing may be the thing that ends up bringing us back together. For some strange reason, the idea of being divorced has liberated my husband. I guess he feels he's taking back something I took from him when I strayed. He always seems to be in a good mood lately, and his blood pressure has dropped back into the healthy range to the point where his doctor said he can start slowly coming off the medication. Hearing this was a big relief. Call me crazy, but that's been my observation. While I prefer staying married, if getting divorced will improve my chances of getting him back, then I'm okay with it. I'm not getting my hopes up too high just yet, but I'm praying every day that somehow this all works out for us. And that's the end of her fourth update. And now she comes back with her final update so we can see how things turned out for this family. And this final update came 19 weeks later. So almost, what's that, 5 months later? Our divorce was finalized last week. We live in a state where the process happens very quickly if both parties have reached an agreement prior to the hearing. Our hearing came up in just under 5 months, and everything was handled that day. I was hoping the process would drag out longer to give me more time to convince my husband to change his mind, but what can you do? For right now, we're all still living in the family home and plan to do so for a few more months until the end of the school year. After that, we'll list the house and it will likely sell very quickly. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't think it is a good idea for him to be living in the same house with his ex-wife. She says, that's going to be a difficult time for me, and I hope it doesn't come to that. I'd prefer that we all continue living together until my son graduates from high school, but we'll see. So her son just turned 13. So what she's saying here is she would like it if she and her ex-husband lived together for the next 4 years. My question is, why is this guy still living with his ex-wife? One of them should have moved out once the divorce was final. All of our assets were equally split during the divorce, and I was awarded a small child support payment and 2 years of alimony, which will kick in once we sell the house and go our separate ways. So even though she cheated, she's getting child support and she's going to get alimony for 2 years. I'm hoping this will be an added incentive for my husband to keep our family together longer, but the decision is his to make. As I stated in my last update, we're getting along great now. It's almost like we're still married without the intimacy, which I miss terribly. We're great friends and great parents to our children. The four of us share meals together and do all kinds of activities as a family, but my husband and I don't do anything alone together. I still question why he felt the need to rush to divorce me when he doesn't seem to be in any hurry to break up the family. If anyone out there can explain this, I'd love to hear from you. Well, I'm going to explain it to you right now. The reason why he rushed to divorce you is he wanted to take back that power that you took from him when you cheated. Now he's got control of his life again, so he feels good about himself. He's going to move on with the next phase of his life. For now, I'm taking one day at a time and being the best ex-wife and co-parent I can be. Hopefully my ex-husband, she says with a sigh, will appreciate this and decide to give our relationship another try at some point. So that's the end of the story. And I think it was a great story. And I think overall, this guy handled the situation very well. My one criticism, though, is why is he still living under the same roof with his ex-wife? He needs to sever that relationship and move on with his life. Now, he's always going to have to be in communication with her, of course, because they've got children together, but that doesn't mean they should be living together. So that's my only criticism of him. And now I want to go over what I think are the morals of this story. The first one, most cheating women react on their emotions, then think about the consequences later. This woman was a perfect example of that. If you remember early on in the story, after she did the deed with this guy, then she starts thinking, oh my goodness, this could jeopardize my marriage. Oh my goodness, I could have gotten pregnant. Oh my goodness, I could have gotten an STD. Well, meanwhile, she should have been thinking about those things before she did what she did. Next, the lure of attention and validation is irresistible for women, especially married women between the ages of 30 and 60. Now, the reason I pointed out that age range is because, as you know, it's thought that around age 30 is that point in a woman's life when she starts hitting the wall, and age 50 or thereabouts is when she goes through menopause. So that range between 30 and 60 I see as a very highly vulnerable time for potential cheating, especially when they're being shown attention and given validation by another man. Next, a strong man will never accept any form of cheating. It doesn't matter that she was only with this guy, according to what she told us, one time and she immediately confessed. That didn't matter. The fact is, she cheated, and a strong man is not going to put up with any form of cheating, whether it was with another man, another woman, whether it was just one time, whether it was 10 times. If cheating has occurred, a strong man will not put up with that. Next, mental stress will eventually impact your physical health. That's why I always recommend once cheating has occurred, you need to sever that relationship and move on with your life. If not, your mind is going to be eaten away with the thoughts that are going to go through it about what's my wife doing now? Oh, I'm thinking back to what she did with this guy. I wonder if she did that. I wonder if they did this. It's going to tear you apart and you're not going to be able to live with yourself. And finally, after the breakup, go your separate ways and move on with your life, even if you have to take a financial hit. And like I said, that was the only criticism I had for this guy, is why is he still living under the same roof as his wife? So those are my thoughts on this story. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? How do you think this guy handled the situation? Would you have done something similar, or would you have done something totally different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. And I will talk to you